Self-disclosure is a difficult concept to explain at times. It's important that we practice self disclosure, but always remember that it's not about us. In this lecture, we're going to look at the definitions, the different types of self disclosure, and learn how to actually practice self disclosure within our counseling practice. One can say that self disclosure is to make known what is unknown about the counselor. It brings about a dialect between what is and what is not said. Disclosure, in a certain sense, undo silences, distance, and ignorance. It is a way that you connect with a person's inner personal self and the outer world. In a sense, self disclosure between the therapist and the client is then the connection between the inner world of the counselor and the outer world, which will be the client. Self disclosure has to be carefully managed within the constraint of a counseling setup. It is not always that easy to talk about yourself or correct to disclose certain things about yourself. So, as we journey together in self disclosure, let us look at first the definition of self disclosure. Self disclosure is the process of communication by which one person reveals information about themselves to another person. The information can be descriptive or evaluative and can include thoughts, feelings, goals, failures, fears, dreams, a person's likes and dislikes, and favorites. So it's about telling somebody about yourself within a specific relationship. There are four types of self disclosure. The first self disclosure we're going to look at is deliberate self disclosure. This is where counselors are intentional in the verbal or non-verbal manner of giving away personal information. It's deliberate actions, for example, placing a family photo in the office or a story that you tell about yourself. There are also two types of deliberate self disclosure: self revealing and self involving. Self revealing means that you tell a story about something that you have lived through. Self involving is when you get involved in a certain problem narrative of the client. The second type is unavoidable self disclosure. Here are a wide range of possibilities. For example, the counselor's gender, age, and physicality. It will also disclose through the place of your practice, the tone of your voice, whether you are stuttering, accent that you have, any visible tattoos, or any disabilities. Then, something that we need to consider: what do we reveal about ourselves by the way that we dress, our hairstyles, the use of makeup or not makeup, facial hair, wedding and engagement rings, or the wearing of religious symbols. For example, Christians will wear a cross, while somebody that might be Jewish will wear the Star of David. If a counseling office is located within the counselor's house or home, it always involves extensive self disclosure. Non-verbal cues or body language like raised eyebrows and etc., which we have already discussed, are also sources of self-disclosure. Also, information regarding upcoming vacations or when you will be closed are also unavoidable self-disclosures. The third type is called accidental self-disclosure. This is normally unplanned. You meet your client by accident outside a mall. It's spontaneous, can be verbal or non-verbal reactions. It can be when you publish information regarding your practice or religious beliefs. And something that I want to add, social media. Many of our clients will follow you on social media, so be careful what you disclose on your various social media platforms. The last form of self disclosure is clients' actions and intentions. Clients can, and I've used the word Google the therapist, search online about the therapist. They can gather social media information and may even request personal information like your family history, where you volunteer, community, and recreational involvement. Counselors do not have control over what is posted online about them or who have access to it at all times. So be careful what you reveal about your personal information. Clients can deliberately track, spy, or even stalk a counselor, and you need to be aware of that. This does not happen often, but it can happen. Advantages of self disclosure. Self disclosure builds rapport and trust between the client and the counselor. It provides validation. The client starts to feel that they are not alone and that it's normal what they are going through. It reduces power differentials between counselors and clients. The client experience a feeling that they are not isolated or alone, and the counselor provides a role model for appropriate social interaction. I want to emphasize this point. The counselor, without really realizing it, will become a role model for the client. How do you interact with your clients? The disadvantages. Some forms of self revelation can compromise the professional relationship, and the client starts to see the counselor as a friend. It can sometimes move focus away from the client and focus on the counselor. It may confuse the client. The client may become burdened so that they hold back or censor their own information. The client may feel that the counselor is too involved in the process, and the pressure that the client feels into disclosing what they are not ready for uh, brings anxiety to the counseling process. Manage carefully how and what you disclose. This brings me to the last point. How do you practice self disclosure? Think about your hand. Imagine the 5 fingers on your hand. First of all, number one, stop. Consider, why are you going to tell this story? Second point, be brief. Do not tell them long, drawn out narratives. This has a negative impact on the counseling relationship. Thirdly, you have to use I statements. In other words, this is your personal experience that you are sharing. Number four, what is your client's values? Bring that into mind when you tell a story about yourself. Lastly, consider the impact. Will this be useful for the client, or will this create pressure for the client to respond in a certain manner? So stop, be brief, make use of I statements, consider the value system of your client, and lastly, the impact before you just tell a story that might derail the counseling process. Self disclosure is not a strange concept. I want us to go and travel right back into the Bible, into the story of Exodus. We all know about Moses and his birth, and he goes and he lives in the palace, and then he sees his people up being beaten down, and he steps in and he flees into the desert. And as he wanders 40 years in the desert, there's one day that a Hebrew man, meets God. And God uses self revelation to explain to Moses who is he. Exodus 3, verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am have sent you. This is a revelation of the name known to the Hebrew people, but was lost in this current generation. The name should bring understanding of referring back to God, the creator and the sustainer of all life. It brings us to the plan that God had for the Hebrew nation. Exodus 3 verse 18 reads as follows, And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go on a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. There's an identity that changed within the revelation of God to the Hebrew nations. For us as Christians, that revelation happens in the book of John, where it starts with, In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1 verse 1. It's a revelation of Christ and what His love that He has for man. Let's just close our thoughts on self-revelation. Self-revelation has a purpose. It must bring healing into the conversation. And it's always about those that are not you. That's important. It's not about you. Self-revelation is, you don't need people to adore you when you tell them something or sympathize with you. What you want is for them to learn from a story in your own life. In our last video lecture, we are going to look at the Carl Rogers and his person-centered therapy. There are a couple of core values and how this undergirds all biblical counseling.